Hello, everyone, and welcome to Channel Denmark. Today, I'm Eva Steen, and today we have Lori Dooley with us from Tennessee in the States, and we are so happy that she's going to represent the health message to us. And I myself, I'm really happy for the health message. I had health problems for 25 years when I slowly started. I shouldn't say slowly though, because it went quite fast. And when I changed my diet, my body became, more or less healed. So praise the Lord for that. And that actually was the way in too for getting to know the Bible, because the Bible also has a health message for us. So I'm happy
That's
that
right.
Lori will come and tell her story today with the leaky gut, which I think very many people have, even if they don't know that it's called leaky gut. So she will
Mm-hmm.
tell her story. She will tell the symptoms, what to do about it. So let's pray. Father in heaven, we are so grateful that we have a good God in heaven who wants us to have just be just as happy mentally as spiritually and physically. And we are so thankful that you have given us good advice to keep healthy. And you know that we live in a time on this earth when more or less all people have some kind of health problems, and you have given us directions. We pray that you will help us to cooperate with you and use our willpower to do these changes. And we know that the food you have given to us, it tastes so good. So we don't miss anything out of giving anything up. We know that you want the best for us. You are not taking anything away which is good for us, just the bad things. Please be with Lori now as she's going to tell her story and just share experiences. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lori. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about leaky gut. I'm going to start off by talking about what it is and some of the symptoms of it. Then, I'm going to be sharing my testimony, my experience with leaky gut, and then I'm going to be giving some principles found in prophecy and the writings of the pioneers of the Seventh-day Adventist Church that have helped me and hopefully will be a blessing to those out there. So, first of all, what is leaky gut? If you On the next slide, I have a list of symptoms of what leaky gut is. Now, basically, it's when the small intestine becomes damaged, causing undigested food particles, toxic waste products from and also bacteria to leak and to get into the bloodstream. So, foreign substances that should not be there. Now, here's a list of symptoms that you may have: diarrhea, nutritional deficiencies. I'm not going to go through and read each one, but basically, if you are suffering from any health symptom or condition, it is most likely rooted in your gut. The digestive system is the basis of so many, it's the basis of health and so many health conditions. So if you go to Google and if you have a health condition and you type in whatever health condition you have, along with intestinal permeability, which is another name for leaky gut, you will probably find articles and documents connecting the two. That's how prevalent leaky gut is with any disease. So it's huge. Um, I want to share a bit of my story now on the next slide. I I was raised vegetarian and um, ate pretty healthy growing up. However, I did chronically overeat 3 times a day. I developed some digestive issues very early on. And then when I hit college and the stress of everything hit, I was very sick, and to the point I just couldn't digest food. Like everything hurt my stomach, everything. Um, I used to be 40 pounds overweight, but then eventually ended up losing weight, and then I couldn't put any weight on. There's been many times in my life when I just like I literally don't know what to eat that won't hurt my stomach. I have never met anybody with as poor digestion as I dealt with, and not very many people could really understand what it was like. But on the other hand, I was always interested in health and trying to eat healthy and learn the Seventh day Adventist health message. And I went to nursing school, became a nurse because I wanted to help people and work with sick people. I also have been to 3 different lifestyle centers and worked at them or been educated. And I literally tried everything. I tried the raw diet. I tried just regular vegetarian, regular vegan. Tried just different juicing diets, the alkaline diet, elimination diet, gluten-free. I've tried everything, but nothing seemed to get me completely well. All like the low carb, high fat. We tried the low fat. Um, and I didn't know it wasn't working for me. And I felt like such a hypocrite because here we have a message and we're supposed to be helping others get well, but here I am sick. And I was just discouraged, but yet I couldn't really let anybody know that because I didn't want to give God a bad name or our health message a bad name, that it really wasn't for me. So a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, I just really hit rock bottom. And I was like, God, I need healing. And I know it's not your will that I'm sick. But I don't know how to get well. I'm so confused. I'd gotten to the point I was so confused because I'd been to all these lifestyle centers, but they were all saying something different a little bit. And I tried it all and none of it was helping me. And then there's the world, I would read. I had stacks of health books. I mean, a bookcase full of them. I would read them all and try everything I could, but I still didn't have any energy. I had brain fog, candida, chronic fatigue, endometriosis. I couldn't, just all these things. So I hit rock bottom and I basically on my knees, I said, God, I am tired of trying so many things. I need to know from you. How do I get well? How do I get well? And I told him, I am willing to unlearn anything that I have learned, and I want you to teach me the truth. Because, I was pretty educated as far as health principles. I thought I knew a lot of them. I think that is what God was waiting on, because as soon as I prayed that prayer, I started getting answers. Now, that was over a year ago, and God was merciful to me. He started giving me answers, but I had many, many, many things to unlearn. And it's not been until recently where I really feel like, and now I can confidently say that God has and is healing me. But I've had so many things, so many steps to go through, and ideas that I used to preach and tell others, like this is the truth about health, like certain ideas, and I've had to like surrender those and realize I was completely wrong. Um, but after this experience, God started showing me things, and I went back and I decided I'm just going to go back to the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy. What do they say? And if on the next slide, I have a quote that has been powerful to me. It's from Manuscript Release. It says, when the great question of health reform was opened before me, the methods of treating the sick were plainly revealed to me. Now, this is Ellen White speaking. She said that the methods of treating the sick were plainly revealed to her. Well, who revealed them? I completely agree that I believe that it was Christ that revealed them to her. So any method, I have to ask myself, have I tried to use methods to get well that are not part of what God revealed to Ellen White? Because if I am, I'm not using the methods that God gave. Um, On the next slide, there's another quote that goes along with it. It says, "There are many ways of practicing the healing art, but there is only one way that heaven approves." So, wow, just because somebody gets well, just because somebody is improving and healing, does not mean that that is God's method and that He is behind that particular healing method. So I did some study and I found, I need to find like a template. What are God's true healing methods? How do I know? Because there's a lot of ideas. There's so much confusion out there. And I truly believe that even in our health message, there is a false health message that has come into our church. And we need to test everything by the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, even our medical missionaries, because many of them are going to the world, learning a lot of good stuff, but it might not necessarily agree with the counsel that we have been given. Then what they do is they quote spirit of prophecy, and then we think that they are in complete agreement with spirit of prophecy, and so we trust them with our lives and with our health. When coming to find out, like I trusted these people, but then going back to spirit of prophecy, I realized the counsel that they were giving me was directly contrary to spirit of prophecy. So yeah, just check everything out. Even just like we do with the Bible, we need to test our health methods. On the next slide, I put together a simple list of some things that the guideline. God's true healing methods are inexpensive. I don't have this on a slide, but she does say that in manuscript or medical ministry, page 266, you cannot teach health reform unless you present the most inexpensive methods of living. The enemy must have no advantage in any line. Therefore, there are a lot. I mean, I have wasted thousands of trying to get well. There's a lot of very, very expensive treatments out there. Not that they're all bad, but I truly believe that God doesn't need very expensive stuff to get us well. If we follow His principles, He does the healing. So number 2 is it needs to be simple. It will not tax or debilitate the system. It's available to common people. Isn't God good that you do not have to be rich to get well? It's also in accordance with the Bible, and God's true healing methods will not contradict spirit of prophecy. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about what is disease. In Counsels on Health, page 90, she says, disease is an effort of nature to free the system from the conditions that result from a violation of the laws of health. Now, leaky gut, we can consider that a disease. So you just put that in there. Leaky gut is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of the laws of health. So when I do a Google search on leaky gut, most of the causes that I find are actually all blaming conditions or somebody else for my health problem. And so but this quote says that disease is an effort of my system to basically it's a violation of the laws of health. So most of my presentation is going to focus on what I can actually do to take responsibility for my body and the disease that I have, and how when I line up with the laws of nature, then God will come and do the healing. So step 1 is the cause should be ascertained. What is the cause of leaky gut? We're going to talk about that in a minute. Number 2, unhealthful conditions should be changed and wrong habits corrected. Number 3, then nature is to be assisted in her efforts to expel impurities and reestablish right conditions. Now, most of the time when you go to the doctor, they just skip to number 3 and they either, give drugs or remedies, some sort of herbs alternative. It does say we can assist nature, but that's step 3. Number 1, we need to find the cause. So in the next slide, I talk about some of the causes based on my research that I believe brought upon leaky gut. Number 1, wrong conditions of eating. That would be like how we eat and when we eat. Number 2 would be eating poor quality foods, like what we're putting in our body. Number 3, which is huge, is stress. Stress is just huge. It wreaks havoc on the digestive system. And number 4 is toxins. And number 4 is the only one that we really can partially blame on others, because our environment is just toxic. It really is. They spray the foods. We might have get toxins from vaccinations or fillings if we have mercury in our mouth. Also, drugs like the NSAIDs. There's a lot of drugs that will completely damage the lining of the gut. So things like that, antibiotics, contributors to leaky gut. But we're going to spend the rest of the time focusing on what we can actually do to. So the first cause that I believe on the next slide I talk about is overeating. Now, I don't think most people realize how damaging overeating is. And when I went back, I didn't really mention it right now. After I started studying Spirit of Prophecy, the Lord led me to the writings of the Seventh-day Adventist pioneers. And these men and women, they wrote 2 journals called The Health Reformer and Good Health. The Health Reformer and Good Health. And that's they started this journal in 1866, and I've read at least 10 or 20 years worth of these periodicals, and they pretty much confirm everything that Ellen White wrote and give a lot more details on it. So a lot of the information that I'm giving is either from pioneers or the Spirit Prophet. So the reason I mention that is because the pioneers speak a lot about overeating, and they say it is absolutely the worst thing that you can do to your digestive system. Now, sometimes we don't realize the effect that it has. And John Harvey Kellogg, which is one of the pioneers, he actually has an article in there which says that if someone comes to the sanitarium or the health center that they had and they still overeat 1 time per week, they will not get well. And I read that and I was like, oh my, is there any hope for me? Because I've struggled with overeating all of my life. And even though now I'm slightly underweight, the reason I am underweight is because of overeating. At first, like I mentioned, I was overweight. And then eventually, even Ellen White says it in Ministry of Healing, some people grow corpulent or heavy, others grow or become thin and feeble as a result of the body trying to throw off all the excess food. And so what I believe happened to me and the Lord showed me is that all the overeating that I've done over the years just so wore out my digestive system that I was not able to digest and get the nutrients out of the food I was eating. And so it's just been a struggle to get back up there. But they do have some suggestions as far as overeating. Well, for me, it's been discouraging because I've tried and tried and tried to not overeat, but it's something that we really need the power of the Lord to help us with. And as long as I have an improper relationship with food, I will never be able to overcome it. So I have had to just surrender food to the Lord and tell God, I want you on the throne of my heart. Please restore a proper relationship with food. And he will do that. And he has done it for me. And I don't struggle like I used to. On the next slide, I'm going to give you a suggestion that Ellen White actually had. She said, I have a suggestion to make to those who have moral courage and self-control enough to try it. If your work is sedentary, take exercise every day, and at each meal, eat only 2 or 3 kinds of simple food, taking no more of these than will satisfy the demands of hunger. Make up your mind that this is all the food you will give your stomach. For some days, perseveringly carry out your determination and eat less than you have in the past. See how this will work. So if we're used to overeating, we cannot be a good judge of how much we should eat. So use your frontal lobe and make a good decision before you even start, and put your food on the plate, 2 or 3 simple foods. Just say, this is what I'm going to eat. And then enjoy it. When you get up, don't think about it anymore. Just, you're done eating and don't think about it till the next meal. That's been helpful for me. The next thing, if you go on to 2, is not chewing enough. Now, after I prayed that prayer, I said, God, help me to unlearn everything that I have learned. And you show me what I'm doing wrong. This is the very first thing that he showed me, is not chewing my food. And overeating and not chewing your food go hand in hand. It's very easy to overeat if you're not chewing your food. Possible to not eat if you don't chew your food and you scarf it down so quickly. After the Lord convicted me, I need to chew my food. I was doing some research on it. I came across a really cool story about a man named Antonio Stanchich. Back in World War II, he was taken as a prisoner of war, and he was taken to a concentration camp. And while he was there, they gave very, very little food, just like a piece of bread for breakfast, and I think soup for lunch and dinner. And he decided that one day he had his water and he was swishing it in his mouth and just playing with it, and he realized that he seemed to enjoy it more, and it felt he had more energy when he chewed his water. So he decided that he would try it with food. So he experimented with different numbers, and he found that if he chewed each bite of food 150 times, he had more energy, he was not as hungry, and he was not as cold. Because in his unit, they were freezing. They hardly gave him any clothes. They were working him very, very hard all day, and they were starving. But if he chewed his food 150 times per bite, he wouldn't have as much symptoms. At the end of 2 years, he was rescued. And in his unit, which was, I believe, 24 men, I'm sorry, let me back up just a second. Most people thought he was crazy for doing that, but there are 2 men that decided to join him. And at the end of the 2 years when they were rescued, there was only 3 men alive. Antonio and the 2 men that had joined him in the chewing their food 150 times. And Antonio contributes his survival solely to chewing his food. Now, 150 times per bite is extreme, but it does illustrate a purpose that the more we chew our food, the more nutrition we are going to get out of each bite. And on the next slide, I show that Spirit Prophecy backs this up. She says, the benefit derived from food does not depend so much on the quantity eaten as on its thorough digestion, nor on the gratification of taste so much as on the amount of food swallowed as on the length of time it remains in the mouth. So wow, however, if I have a bite of food, how much nutrition my body is going to get out of that depends on how long it's going to stay in my mouth. So when I was researching this, I was like, wow, I've got to try this. So I started off with 50 times. I started chewing 50 times per bite. And the results were unbelievable. Like, I could not believe just the benefit that I received so quickly. And I started sharing with people, and they started trying it too. And then people would come back to me and give me their testimonies. I mean, their digestion problems were improving and getting better. They could now eat things they couldn't before, and they were having less trouble with overeating, all kinds of things, which is really awesome. And I have another message on YouTube talking about on the chewing. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that with the stress of life and traveling, like, I couldn't keep up with it, and it's hard. It's really something that I've had to ask the Lord to help me with too, because there was only so far my self-control could go. Like, if I'm stressed or whatever, then there I am back chewing my food fast again. But it has huge benefits to chewing your food, and the Lord has just recently given me the victory again and just helping me chew my food. And so I recommend, like, I don't really say, you need to chew your food 50 times, although it is very helpful to try that for a time to see what it does. But the principle is chew your food until it is a good cream. And even John Harvey Kellogg in the Pioneer writings said that somebody with digestive problems, they call dyspepsia, any digestive problems, should chew their food 4 to 5 times longer. So they agree with the research that I found. Okay, on the next thing we're going to talk about in the next slide is stress during meals. Anytime stress is bad, but particularly during meals. When we have stress during meals, the saliva does not produce like it needs to. The stomach, the fight or flight response goes off, drawing the blood away from the stomach. And you're not going to produce the enzymes you need to digest your food. So it's actually better to not eat than to eat if you are stressed. Or I believe I did come across a quote. Ellen White says that it is better to not eat than to not chew your food. Like, if you bolt your food down because you're in a really big hurry. If you only have 15 minutes, then only eat a little bit of food, what you can chew in 15 minutes. So yeah, stress during meals, it will wreak havoc on your system. And that's just, knowing that isn't always, I mean, it's a step, but how to overcome that stress and have the peace of God at all times is going to be helpful. The next thing is drinking with meals. Now, when we drink with our meals, that's going to dilute the saliva and also dilute the stomach acid. So those enzymes and hydrochloric acid are not going to have the effect on our food that they would. Also, it's going to slow down digestion and possibly cause fermentation in the stomach. So it's better to drink 30 minutes at least before, and then up to 2 hours after our meals. We want to drink plenty of water between meals, but just not a lot right during our meals. And if you are a little thirsty, then just take a little sip afterwards, swish it around in your mouth. And the worst thing you can do is drink cold water, because cold will shut your system off. Cold tells the blood, it constricts the blood vessels. So if we're putting cold in our stomach, that's going to send the blood somewhere else and causes the food to just sit there. So the next thing is other wrong conditions of eating, such as eating at improper times. Now, our body is very much on a clock. We work on a circadian rhythm, and the closer that we can get to that, the better we're going to function. So ideally, we should have set times for our meals, and we should stick to that time each day. 2 meals are better than 3. And according to the pioneers, when you're making a switch from 3 to 2. It might take several weeks for your body to get used to it. And just because you might feel like shaky, hungry, that's not true hunger. And if you push through it, a lot of times your body will get used to it. Now, the one time that it is good to drink cold water is if you're hungry and you don't want to eat. So if you have like a little glass of ice water in the evening, if you're trying to skip supper, then it will tell your stomach to shut down for the night and not be digesting food. Next is eating improper food. Now, obviously, food, we're made up of what we eat. And we've talked about overeating, we've talked about chewing our food, but we have to have the right food in there. And before I show you a list of things to leave out, I'm going to go through what God intended for us to eat. I truly believe in the Genesis account that God created the best food for Adam and Eve, and he put us in the garden, and he wanted us to, we were supposed to live forever, and we need to go back to what he originally intended. So the first item is fruit. Now, fruit is being attacked. And if you look at the world and what they're saying, a lot of times they tell people with cancer or with illness to stay away from fruit because it has sugar in it. But when I went back to Genesis, God created the fruit for us. When I went back to prophecy, she has these quotes that I'll quickly read. She says, fruit, if it can be obtained, is the best article of food. She also says a plain, simple, but liberal supply of fruit is the best food that can be placed before those who are preparing for the work of God. Ministry of Healing, 235, says a fruit to brain work. And also, this is surprising, but she wrote a letter to a specific person who was very sick. And she said, you are a sick man. This is actually Dr. Kress. Eat no vegetables. Eat fruit and plain, well-baked bread. So I just want to bring out the point, and actually when I was studying this, I was of the belief that I shouldn't be eating much fruit because I had candida and I have had issues with yeast and chronic fatigue. And so I was told by medical missionaries to cut way back on the fruit or even give it up for a time. And so I tried, and at that time I said, as soon as I get settled in my place in Australia, we were traveling in Australia, then I'm going to cut fruit out of my diet and try this candida diet. Well, I get to this house in Australia that they have provided for us, and come to find out, there was 18 different kinds of fruit trees on the property. And I was like, God, what on earth? Either you're very cruel or you're trying to tell me something, because here I am thinking I'm not supposed to be eating this fruit. But then it was a great relief to read these quotes and find that Ellen White and the pioneers, if someone was sick, they said fruit is the food you should be eating. Do not, like nowadays when you're sick, they say cut out fruit and eat vegetables. But for them, it was the opposite. They said eat fruit and cut back or leave out vegetables. And when you look at Genesis, fruit was originally intended for man. And it wasn't until after the fall that vegetables were brought in. Now, I do believe that we need vegetables and there's a place for them. But clearly from these quotes, fruit is the best article of food. So the next food item is grains. Now, this one is also being greatly attacked, and I believe it's for a good reason. Fruit and grains was our original diet. And if you go and look at the health message out there that the world has, they're telling people to get off grains and to cut back on fruit. And I bought into all of this. I cut out fruit, I cut out grains. But then I went back and I read these quotes, and this is just one. I mean, there's hundreds of them. But here Ellen White says bread dried in the oven is one of the most wholesome articles of diet. In fact, there's another place where she counsels women to teach their daughters how to cook because the bread is essential to the health of the family. Now, this greatly confused me because I used to preach everybody needs to be off of wheat and grains, and I mean, not necessarily grains, but at least the gluten grains. But when I go back to the Bible, I mean, Jesus is the bread of life, and he gave them manna, which is a bread-like cracker. Also, if you look at Spirit of Prophecy, she talks about bread being the staff of life. And also, she says that we'll come to a time when we cannot use dairy, milk, or eggs because they'll be diseased. But there's no quote that says we will come to a time when we cannot use wheat. But yet, I didn't feel good when I was eating wheat. I gave up weight over a decade ago. But yet, going back to Spirit of Prophecy, I just told God I have to relearn everything. So these are some questions that I had. Like, God, why are so many people getting sick from grains if they're so important? And on the next slide, I just ask, what about wheat? Now, what I'm sharing is what I believe God has shown me. I'm not saying I have all the answers on it. Like I said, I gave up wheat over a decade ago because I thought it was hurting me. And every time I've tried to add it back, I tried 1 year ago. I just started eating bread again because I thought, maybe I can eat it. And I got these huge bags under my eyes. And finally I gave up the wheat, and it took 3 weeks for the huge bags to go away. But I have found that certain grains like spelt and einkorn, I do okay with. In my study about wheat, there's a few reasons, or grains, there's a few reasons why people are having issues with them. Number one is we don't know how to cook them properly. And this is a quote that I found from the Pioneer Writings. They say the use of imperfectly cooked cereals is without doubt responsible for a great share of the prevailing dyspepsia among American people. So they actually say that grains should be very easy to digest, but most people do not cook them long enough for the starch to be broken down. And when we eat undigested starch, it causes digestive issues and even little scars on our brain. I can't think of the name of them, but there's research that undigested starch causes a lot of issues in our body. So any cereal that you want to cook, you need to make sure that you cook it for several hours. And maybe if I get all the research, I can do a video later on it. But there's different lengths for each grain and how long it needs to be cooked. And if you make bread, the best way for it to digest is by baking it again, drying it out in the oven. It's called Zwieback. And then it makes it crispy and hard, and it's very easy to digest at that point. The second reason I believe that so many people are having issues is because of all the things that are sprayed on them. Back a few months ago, I told you I've been eating spelt for several years and having no problems with it. But I was eating a certain kind of spelt, like always getting organic. And when I moved here, the bakery just close by, they make a spelt bread. And I started eating it because I thought, wow, this is great. I can just buy theirs. And I got those bags under my eyes. And so one morning I just went to the Lord. I was like, God, what's going on? Because I don't want to give up spelt. I think I was doing fine on it. And then I realized that sprout bread is not organic. So I wondered, is there a difference? And so then I did some research, and I was researching into glyphosate, which is the form of Roundup that they spray on wheat and actually most grains, most beans, and most of our food. So they spray it on the wheat. It's not genetically modified, but they spray it on it to kill it quickly so that they can harvest it. And anything that's not organic is going to be sprayed. And even if it is organic, they're finding still traces of this glyphosate. Now, apparently, glyphosate changes how our gut reacts with gluten. So I think that this might be one major reason why so many people are having issues with gluten, is because we're eating all this glyphosate, which is damaging our gut, and then we cannot digest, like it reacts with the gluten. So I gave up that spelt bread that was doing that to me, and then for a while I didn't eat any wheat products, and then I did go buy organic spelt again, and I seemed to do fine with it. And now I also bought heirloom organic glyphosate tested wheat, and I've been eating that, and I seem to have no issues with it, no digestive problems, not the huge dark circles I had, and I have energy, feel good. So another reason that I think people have issues with it, on top of everything I've mentioned, is if we think something is going to hurt us, it will. And there are so many people out there preaching now that wheat is evil, wheat is bad, we need to get it out of our diet, that people are scared. They're scared. And the placebo effect is so powerful. So if you truly are scared or believe that food is going to hurt you, it will. And so these are just some of the reasons. And I encourage people, like, if you truly have a problem with wheat, yeah, cut it out. But it's not our health message to tell everybody to get off wheat. In fact, the pioneers said that it is the healthiest food on the planet. So if we can't, then go ahead. The next slide I'm going to talk about is vegetables. And I already quoted that top one. You're a sick man, eat no vegetables, eat fruit and plain, well-baked bread. The second quote is interesting. It says, coarse vegetables fail of supplying proper nutriments. She lists coarse vegetables in the same list, if you read the whole quote, as coffee and tea and candy. So what is coarse vegetables? When Ellen White never defines it, when I go to the pioneer writings, they talk about it being vegetables with a lot of roughage. And they also expound that people with digestive issues simply a lot of times cannot digest them. So you have to just experiment with your own body, and if you can't digest them, leave them off for a little while until you can. The third quote says, some require well-prepared vegetables. Others have not been able to use vegetables without suffering the consequences. So yeah, once again, this is just to show that fruit is the food we're to eat if we're truly, really sick. And vegetables, not everybody can tolerate them. Now, I do want to add in, like, what is a vegetable and what is a fruit? Because a lot of things we call vegetables are actually fruit. So anything that has a seed in it is a fruit. So cucumbers, squash, peppers, things like tomatoes, those are fruits. And vegetables are as anything like a root or a twig or leaves, things like that. Now, also, vegetables are much easier to digest if you cook them. And I haven't mentioned it, but I'm not giving a lot of evidence for any of this stuff because I simply can't. It would be a presentation about each simple topic. But hopefully I'm going to whet your appetite and you can go and study this out for yourself with the resources that I give you, because there are some very surprising things in there. Now, the pioneers were very much against a raw diet. They say that a raw diet is fine as long as fruits and nuts are the foods that you're eating, but vegetables and grains must be well cooked, is what they say. Now, vegetables don't need to be cooked for the long hours that grains do, but they say that they need to be cooked. So when I learned that, I was like, wow, that's interesting. And because, all these salads, and I have to eat a huge salad, and then I have to eat my other vegetables, and just the things that people told me to get my nutrition. I was trying to do that every day, and I couldn't digest it. But when I go to eating simple cooked vegetables, like 1 or 2 per meal, then I can digest it much better. The last food group that we're going to talk about is nuts and seeds on the next slide. It says in Counsels on Diets and Foods, these foods, speaking of nuts, should not be used too freely. Now, I had been into, when I went out and studied the authors of the world and the things they tell people they do to get well, I went on the low carb and I was eating a lot of healthy fat, the oils and avocados and nuts and seeds, because I was cutting out grains. But here she says that the fats or the nuts should not be used too freely. So she says in the Crest collection, I have suggested that people only use 1/5 part of the nut preparations called for in these recipes. So people were writing in and saying that they were having digestive trouble. And so she was writing back and saying, just use 1/5 of the nuts because they're hard to digest. And I think I'll just add here, like, I loved my fat. It's good. I loved eating high fat and all the coconut oil and olive oil, and it was really good. And for a good 6 months, I wasn't ready to like ask the Lord about that. Like, what about that, Lord? Is that okay to be eating so much fat? But finally, 6 months into my journey, my health journey, I was still got to a point. I was having stomach aches again. So I said, okay, God, what about oil? Should I be eating this much oil? And I came across a quote. Well, let me back up. Ellen White speaks much about grease. Food should be free from all grease. Grease of all kinds. You'll have to go look those up yourself, but there's many quotes she has saying that. But it's kind of vague. She doesn't define what grease is, which leads people to their interpretations. Some people say grease is purely like animal oil. Some people say grease is all oil. And some people say grease is any cooked oil. So as long as you eat the oil raw, it's okay. But finally, I got to the point where I'm like, okay, God, I'm just ready for you to show me what's the truth about this. Well, I did come across a quote by John Harvey Kellogg, and I'm sorry I don't have the reference, and I'm just going to say it off the top of my head. But he defines grease, and he says, grease, whether in the form of lard, tallow, cottonseed, olive oil, or coconut oil, is not needed. And then he goes on to explain why our body doesn't need free fats, but that our body will get all the fat it needs from the nuts and the seeds and from the natural foods. And if we do use oil, it shouldn't be much at all. In fact, he said use none. Later on in the pioneer writings, they do recommend a little bit of olive oil, but the early pioneer writings, which Ellen White seems to agree more with, she says go back and publish the early articles. They said absolutely no oil or no grease, no olive oil. And there's many people that write in and say, what about olive oil? And they're always saying no, no, no. So I'm just telling you my experience. I decided that for me, I was going to give it up, and I did. And I noticed huge improvements in my digestion right away. I think maybe from eating so much fat, my system just needed a break, and I could digest food a lot better without it. So yeah, that's my experience with that. Okay, moving on to what should not be included in our diet. Now, baking soda and baking powder are some of the worst actual substances. They cause an imbalance. The reason they're so bad is because the stomach needs to be alkaline, or it needs to be very acidic for digestion. And then when it's done, it will dump alkali into the stomach so that it can finish digestion. But baking soda is extremely alkaline, and it will mess up, like it will not allow the stomach to digest properly. So they're just not a part of our health message. Also, vinegar. When you look in the Bible, Jesus would not even taste of the vinegar. Now the world is saying you need to eat vinegar. It's good for you, apple cider vinegar. But we just have to realize that there are fads, there are things that the world will always be preaching that are not in accordance with our health message. And if we stick with our health message, then we'll always be safe. The fads go up and down. Spices. The pioneers talk a lot against spices. Now, some medical missionaries are promoting certain spices, and now to use it as a herb, there are spices that are medicinal, and you can, but to put them on our food, the pioneers say they stimulate the appetite and cause unnatural cravings, and they actually damage the lining of the gut. So we should not be using any spices regularly. Also, coffee and tea. I'm just going to go through these quickly. Alcohol, meat. I believe in the Genesis creation diet, which did not include meat. Dairy. Ellen White did use dairy, and she promoted it. She got on to people for saying that we need to do away with it too quickly. In fact, the only reason she really gives for giving up dairy is because of disease. Animals would become so diseased. So when we tell others to give up dairy, that's the reason that we should give. There's a lot of other reasons now too, as far as digestion wise and stuff. But the reason Ellen White gives is because of disease. Okay, next, which I already spoke about, is grease. And you can do your own research on grease. And there's basically in the health world, you can find whatever you're looking for. If you want to search and find that candy is good for you, like there's actually, like I Googled it, there's like document after document talking about the benefits of candy. So really find anything you're looking for. And even the studies, like even who it's funded by, or that's why I'm so glad that God gave us He gave us prayer and show each one of us particularly what to do. Now, also improperly cooked food, I spoke a little bit of already, and raw food. A lot of raw food is very hard to digest, such like the raw carrots, raw greens, raw things like that. I personally stopped eating all of those because I find they're easier to digest if they're cooked. Now, the reasons that the pioneers give for cooking vegetables, which I really haven't looked into too much, but the reason they give is that there is a minuscule amount of starch in vegetables that needs to be cooked. So like a carrot has starch in it, and that undigested raw starch will not be wholesome to our body. So in order to release the nutrients, you need to cook it. Now, let's see. The other one, the last one on this list, is liquid food. Now, people are all into smoothies and juicing. Ellen White talks about how liquid food is debilitating to the body, and the more hard food we eat, the better for our digestive system. Now, one of the reasons is because of saliva and chewing. Now, typically, a soft food, we don't chew as long and then we swallow it. But even if that's not a factor, like if we choose to keep a food in our mouth for, let's say, a minute, well, Kellogg did an experiment and he had people, or I'm not sure how he did it, but he took different foods and had them chewed for 5 minutes each. So even if it was a banana, he made them chew it for 5 minutes. I'm not sure how you would do that, but then he measured the amount of saliva that it produced. And what he found was that the soft foods produced significantly less saliva than the hard foods. So even if you're chewing it for the same amount of time, a piece of hard food is going to produce much more saliva, which is why Ellen White speaks about Zwieback and twice baked bread being easy to digest, crackers, things like that, because they'll produce that extra saliva for us. Okay, so on the next slide, we're going to talk about food combinations. Now, like I said, this has been a very much of a journey for me. And it's like God shows me something. He showed me the chewing thing. That was first. So I started chewing and I saw drastic improvement. Well, then I kind of hit a rut, and then I had to go back to God. I'm like, okay, what else do you need to show me? And then that just kept happening. And finally, just probably 6 months ago, I was still like having digestive trouble. And I was like, God, what now? And he showed me the food combining. I was eating too many foods at a meal and too complicated. Now, if you have a good, strong digestive system, it doesn't matter as much. You can eat up to 3, 4 different kinds of food. Okay, if you eat more than that, you might have trouble. But John Harvey Kellogg and Ella White, they say that if somebody's having dyspepsia and stomach troubles, you might be able to only tolerate 1, 2, or 3 kinds of food per meal. And the way I was viewing that was fruit is one kind, so I can eat as much fruit as I want. And then grains is one kind, and then nuts, well, then I just won't eat vegetables. But what I found was that eating so many different kinds of fruit at one meal and then all the other stuff, grains and nuts, I just couldn't handle it. So what I started doing for a little while when my stomach was just so weak, it just was having so much trouble, I would eat, like, for one breakfast, I would eat apples for my fruit, and I would eat more than one apple because that was my fruit. The next day, I would have a different kind of fruit. I would just eat that fruit, and then my grain and my nuts. And I just started eating simple like this, and I noticed a huge difference. But like I said before, I don't think it's a rule that we need to preach and tell everybody to do, but for somebody that's really suffering and unable to digest, start eating less combinations. Also, fruits and vegetables they take different digestive juices, and fruits digest very quickly. Vegetables take a lot longer, which is one reason why when you're sick, they say eat fruit, not vegetables. But they should not be eaten at the same meal if possible. Um, and sugar, very bad food combination. Just basically just try to eat simple. God wants us to eat simple and inexpensive, eat simple recipes. The pioneer recipes that they have included in the health articles that I have, Ellen White writes, and she says many of them are just too complex. And to our standards, a lot of them would seem too really simple. But it just goes to show, like, we just need to eat very simple food. Okay, on the next slide here, we're going to talk about how to assist nature. We've talked about some of the causes of leaky gut. We've talked about the habits that we can change and the practices, some of them that we can do. And now, how can we assist nature? First of all, follow the other health laws. There's, water. Are we drinking our water? Are we getting our sunlight? Are we exercising every day? Are we getting enough sleep? Sleep is so important for our gut. Stress. Are we dressing properly? And our perfect health is dependent on circulation. And if we allow our limbs, our feet to get cold, that's going to draw the blood to the improper spots of the body. I do just briefly want to mention fasting. Now, Ellen White says that fasting 1 day or week would benefit some people more than all the medicine in the world. And so they do recommend short fasting, but nowhere does it talk about long fasting. In fact, I found several articles where the pioneers specifically attack long-term fasting. It was a fad back then, and they were writing against it, saying that it's just not good. And Christ fasted for us. And Ellen White, sorry, once again, I don't have these quotes, but I read where she reproves a man for fasting for 40 days. She says, Christ did that for you. It is no avail for you to do that. So she does recommend short fasts, one meal up to, I think, 2 days is the longest. But they also recommend fruit fasting. The pioneers actually speak of fruit fasting as being just as beneficial as water fasting. Now, of course, they didn't have juices back then. There was no juicing machines. Another thing is rest before meals, not afterward. So if you have poor digestion, a lot of times just take a little break, rest and relax before your meal. And then after your meal, go on a digestive walk. This should not be vigorous or strenuous, just a short, up to 15-minute calming digestive walk will promote great benefits to the system. Also, putting heat on the abdomen is something the pioneers recommend. You can do it 30 minutes before you eat, or like 2 hours after you eat. Like anytime your digestion is slow and you need to help draw some of the blood to your digestion. Also, anytime you're having a stomach ache or stomach pains, the heat on the stomach might help. They also talk about something called a wet girdle, which just Google it if you're interested. But basically, they say to wear it at night. It's where you get like a piece of cloth wet, you wrap it around your abdomen, and then you wrap something warm like a wool cloth or just a really heavy blanket around your abdomen, and then you sleep with it. And what that will do is draw the blood to your digestive system to promote healing and good circulation. And they also say it helps put you to sleep, because many times we can't sleep because the brain is going. And if we draw the blood away from the brain, a lot of times that will put you to sleep. The next thing is massaging the bowels. The pioneers talk a lot about that, just pounding the bowels for 5 minutes up to 3 times a day, when you wake up, right before bed, and like before lunch. I found an article in the Pioneer Writings that one guy said he cures people of dyspepsia, and that's what he does. He tells everybody to slap their bowels. And recently, in the last few weeks, I've just found that something that's much easier than doing that is getting a little hand massage machine, and I just like massage it over my abdomen, and that's very helpful. Next is herbs. Now, Ellen White does speak of simple herbs that can help. So some of the ones that I've used for leaky gut specifically are dandelion root and nettle. Slippery elm is very helpful. Marshmallow root, plantain. Just look up how to use them. You can make a tea out of them and drink them right before you eat. The next thing is colon or liver cleanse. You want to make sure that your colon is working properly. We should be having at least 2 bowel movements a day. So one thing that's good for that, though, is massaging the bowels. Probiotics. Now, probiotics is what everybody recommends for leaky gut. I have done a lot of praying over probiotics, honestly, because, my God, I have a lot of questions. Like, if God wanted us to know about probiotics, then why didn't he show Ellen White about yogurt? And I mean, yogurt's been around for thousands of years. She could have easily been shown how to make Rejuvelac or how to make kombucha, or, these things are so easy to make. She could have been shown that, but she wasn't. So I'm like, okay, God, what does this mean? Because everybody's saying we need these probiotics. Now, in 1907, Kellogg does start promoting yogurt, but I'm not sure whether we should trust him by that point, because he'd already apostatized and been disfellowshipped. My personal opinion, you guys need to all go do your own research and come to your own conclusions, but I truly believe that God does not need probiotics to get a person well. I believe that there are other things, and that when we do the laws of health and we bring our body into balance, that God can restore the bacteria, and that the reason the bacteria is in balance is because of the condition that we've created through improper eating. I have heard things like flaxseed and aloe vera and slippery elm will do a similar effect as probiotics. Probiotics are also very expensive, which I don't believe is part of our health message. So once again, everybody needs to study and make their own conclusion. I personally believe that God can and will and is healing me without them. Um, so our last slide, our next slide, I just want to appeal to everybody. Take your personal case before the great physician, the one that knows everything about you and your body, because there may be issues in your life that I have not covered that are causing leaky gut. If you're holding on to bitterness or anger, that right there can bring on sickness and disease. Um, for me personally, I hit another roadblock and I was like, God, I'm literally doing everything right. Why am I still struggling with my health? And you know what he showed me? He showed me that I was making an idol out of it. And I was spending more time studying health, and I loved it more than I did him. And so he took it away from me. He took my health away so that I had to come back to him. And also, just recently, once again, I'm like, God, what